Have you ever felt like nature was trying to tell you something, but you just couldn't understand the language? Sometimes the quietest moments carry the loudest warnings, and in the heart of one of America's most hauntingly beautiful landscapes, that silence almost swallowed a man whole. This is a story of instinct, of timing, of a life that was seconds from ending, if it weren't for an unexplainable intervention by creatures most of us overlook. It's not just a story about a man on a road. It's a story about connection, about animal intelligence and the invisible forces that sometimes choose to act when no one else can. Welcome to the Great Smoky Mountains, a place where fog rolls like waves across the ancient trees, where the wind speaks in whispers, and where life clings to the edge of danger every single day. It was early October, the kind of morning where even the birds seemed hesitant to make a sound, the kind where you can hear your own breath fogging up the windshield. A chill hung in the air, sharp and biting, as if the mountain itself was bracing for something. The newfound gap road twisted and turned through the forest like a silver ribbon, winding between towering pines and steep drops that disappeared into endless green. Tourists had long since gone home for the season. Locals knew this time of year wasn't just beautiful, it was unpredictable. Landslides, sudden storms, falling trees. The Smokies had a habit of reminding people who really owned the land. Behind the wheel of a dented gray pickup truck sat Tom Ellison, a 52-year-old mechanic from Bryson City, North Carolina. He was heading home from a quick job fixing a generator for a ranger outpost near Clingman's Dome. The drive was familiar. The curves, the slopes, even the potholes. He knew them all by heart. But something felt off. Tom had lived his whole life in these mountains. He could smell when a storm was coming. He could tell by the way the squirrels moved whether a predator was near. And that morning, as he climbed into the thinner air, something inside him stirred. The usual morning birdsong was gone. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. A patch of mist clung to the trees like a ghost that didn't want to leave. The road shimmered faintly with dew, but there hadn't been rain. Tom's fingers gripped the wheel a little tighter. His instincts weren't yelling, but they were whispering. And it wasn't just him. Earlier that week, he'd seen strange movement on his property. Deer moving in groups, fast, silent, eyes wide, like they'd sensed a fire no one else could see. His dog, Buck, had refused to leave the porch 2 nights ago, growling low at something only he could hear. Now, as the truck rolled into a clearing, the forest opened up on both sides of the road. This was the stretch Tom always loved most. The view was pure poetry. Soft hills rising and falling like breathing earth, a horizon painted in layers of gold and gray. But today, the beauty felt hollow. He rolled down the window, expecting birds or maybe the distant sound of a stream. Nothing. Not a sound. Just the soft hum of the engine. And then, movement. Something stepped onto the road ahead. Tom slowed. Another, and another. Deer. One by one, they emerged from the woods, stepping carefully but deliberately into the lane. They didn't run, they didn't scatter. They just stood there, blocking the road, shoulder to shoulder, eyes fixed forward like statues carved out of the mist. Tom blinked, counted them. 8? No. 10. 12. He eased the truck to a full stop, shifted to park, and stared. None of them looked at him, not once. His heart thudded in his chest, not from fear, but from something stranger. A quiet pressure, like the kind you feel in a church or just before something sacred breaks the surface of reality. The forest held its breath. Tom stepped out of the truck slowly, boots crunching against the gravel. He didn't dare speak. The deer didn't move. It was as if they were guarding something, or waiting for something, or both. He took a cautious step closer, lifting his hand, not to shoo them, but to show he meant no harm. Still, they didn't flinch. He looked past them, down the stretch of road that disappeared around a bend, his gut twisting tighter with every passing second. That's when he felt it, not saw, not heard, but felt. A deep, low rumble beneath his feet, like the mountain had finally decided to roll over in its sleep. The vibration beneath Tom's boots wasn't sharp or sudden. It was slow, like the low hum of something ancient turning in its sleep. He froze, one hand still half raised toward the herd. For a second he thought maybe he was imagining it. But then it happened again, stronger this time. A subtle shift in the earth, like the mountain was breathing. And still, the deer didn't move. 12 of them now. All of them standing in the same posture, eyes forward, ears twitching once in a while, but their bodies absolutely still. The air was heavier than before, thicker, like time itself had begun to stretch. Tom took a slow step backward, glancing behind him at his truck. A chill ran up his spine that had nothing to do with the cold. Something deep in his gut, the same instinct that had kept him safe through flash floods, bear encounters, and nights lost in the backcountry, was now screaming one simple command: don't move forward. He turned back to the deer. They still hadn't acknowledged him. It was as if he didn't exist. That's when he realized they weren't blocking him. They were protecting something, or someone. The road ahead curved sharply to the left, sloping downward toward a ravine that always made Tom grip the wheel a little tighter. It was notorious for ice patches and falling rocks. But today, there was no rain, no ice, no reason for alarm, except for the deer, and that rumble deep beneath the soles of his boots. He took another step back and leaned against the hood of his truck, pulled his jacket tighter, watched the animals in silence. Their stillness was eerie, not fearful, not alert, purposeful, almost sacred. They weren't afraid, and that's what unnerved him most. Tom had seen deer spook at their own reflections in puddles. He'd watched them bolt at the sound of a snapped twig. But these deer, they were calm, stoic, unified, like a single body spread across 12 quiet forms. One of them, a large buck, maybe the leader, tilted its head slightly, not toward Tom but upward, toward the ridge that ran parallel to the road. Its ears flicked, and then it went still again. The sky had darkened slightly, clouds thickening above the treetops. But there was no wind, no rustling leaves, no birds overhead, just a row of silent deer, and a man beginning to understand that he had no control here. He glanced at his phone. No signal. Of course. Out here, the mountains swallowed reception whole. He slipped it back into his pocket, not even sure who he would call. Who would believe this? Minutes passed. Maybe 5. Maybe 10. Time was starting to slip sideways. He tried waving an arm gently, hoping to spook the deer off the road. Nothing. Not a blink. He took 2 careful steps forward, shoes crunching softly in the gravel. Still, they didn't move. All right, he muttered under his breath. What the hell is going on? Then the earth shifted again. This time, not gently. A sharp jolt, like something deep beneath the mountain had cracked. Tom's body stiffened. He looked past the deer, squinting into the bend in the road. He couldn't see anything unusual, but something was coming. He felt it now, not in his feet, but in his chest. A pressure building. A warning. He turned toward the woods on the other side of the road. Nothing stirred. No squirrels, no rabbits, no birds. Just an overwhelming silence pressing in on all sides. That's when one of the deer finally moved. It was the smallest in the group. A young doe. She took a single, slow step forward, then stopped again, eyes still fixed on the curve ahead. Tom's breath fogged in front of him as he exhaled. He wasn't sure whether to stay or run, but somehow he knew that moving now, driving ahead, pushing through, was the wrong choice. And yet, wasn't it foolish to put your life in the hands of a group of deer? That's when a thought hit him, completely out of nowhere. Something his grandmother used to say, back when he was just a boy running through the woods behind her cabin. Animals know the land better than we do. And sometimes when they stop, you stop, even if you don't know why. They listen to the earth. We forgot how. He hadn't thought of her in years, but now her voice rang in his head like a bell. Tom's throat tightened. All right, he whispered to the forest. I'll trust you. He stepped backward, slowly, carefully, until he was beside the truck again. The deer didn't flinch. The buck's ear twitched. Nothing more. He opened the driver's side door and sat down, engine still running, hand resting on the steering wheel but not moving it. He left the door open, just waited, and waited. The rumble returned, but this time it wasn't beneath his feet. It was in the air. Low at first, like distant thunder, but it was wrong. Too deep, too constant, too wide. A sound that didn't end, that grew, that approached. Tom looked up. Birds exploded from the treetops in the distance, hundreds of them. Black shapes against a gray sky. Then he saw it. A wall of dirt and rock tumbling over itself like a beast unchained. It came down fast, devouring trees, snapping trunks like toothpicks, smashing through the bend in the road where he would have been in less than a minute, if the deer hadn't been there. It slammed into the asphalt like the hand of God, sending debris flying 50 feet in every direction. Earthquake, landslide, call it what you want. It didn't matter. Tom couldn't move, couldn't blink. He just watched in stunned silence as the entire stretch of road disappeared. And the deer, still standing, unshaken, just watching, like they already knew, like they'd seen it all before. And in that moment something inside him broke, not in a painful way but in a humbling one. He felt small, insignificant, and yet, somehow, protected. If he had been alone on that road, he would be dead. No doubt, not a chance. He didn't need science to explain it. He didn't need a sign. He had already seen it. If you've ever felt like something bigger than yourself was guiding you, like the world isn't just random chaos, subscribe now. Stories like this remind us that what we call coincidence might just be the language of something greater, something older, something watching, because what happened next and was even harder to explain. The dust from the landslide had barely begun to settle when Tom found himself still gripping the steering wheel, knuckles white, staring into the broken landscape ahead. His heart pounded in his chest, not in panic, but in awe. The section of road that should have taken his life now lay buried beneath a jagged mess of rock, soil, and uprooted trees. And just beyond the devastation stood the deer, untouched, unmoved, and eerily calm. He didn't even realize he was holding his breath until the cold air burned his lungs. He slowly exhaled and looked at the animals again. They weren't just watching the aftermath. They were waiting. Their bodies remained rigid, their heads high, ears pricked. Tom could almost feel them listening, not with their ears but with something else. Something deeper. Something humans had forgotten long ago. He stepped out of the truck once more, feet crunching softly against the gravel. He didn't go far, just leaned against the side door, arms crossed against his chest for warmth. A shiver ran down his spine, not from the temperature, but from something older, something primal. That sense of being observed by forces unseen, a pressure in the air that made every hair on his arm stand on end. The minutes stretched. 5, 10, maybe 15. Time began to warp again, as if the world had slowed down to allow something sacred to take shape. The deer didn't move, not one of them. Their posture was so perfect, so precise it almost looked choreographed. Not a flinch, not a blink. Tom rubbed his face, trying to pull himself back to reason, but there was nothing logical about what was unfolding. These weren't just animals anymore. Not in this moment. They were messengers, guardians, witnesses to something he was still too human to understand. In the silence, he remembered something his grandfather had told him when he was just a boy. Long before smartphones, before the internet, before people forgot how to truly be still. The animals hear what we don't. They move when the earth speaks. If they freeze, you freeze. If they run, you run. And if they watch, pay attention, boy. They're watching what's still coming. His grandfather was Cherokee, a quiet man who never raised his voice and never rushed his words. He had taught Tom how to track deer by broken twigs, how to feel for direction by the wind on your face, how to sense when a storm was about to turn. At the time, it all felt like folklore, romantic, outdated survival skills in a modern world. But now those memories were the only things grounding him. He watched as the youngest doe in the group shifted slightly again, just a single step to the left. Her hooves made no sound. Her eyes still locked ahead. Then stillness again. It wasn't fear that held her in place. It was focus. Something about the way her muscles remained tense told him she was ready, not startled. Tom swallowed hard and looked past them again toward the direction of the landslide. The collapse had stopped, but something didn't feel finished. There was no closure, no easing of the air, no release of the invisible tension still holding everything in suspension. And that's when the real waiting began. The wind began to pick up again gently at first, brushing past his ears like a whisper from the forest itself. It wasn't cold. Not anymore. It was intentional, purposeful, as if the mountains had exhaled after holding their breath too long. Still, the deer stood silent. Still, the forest refused to sing. He crouched beside his truck, the weight of the moment pressing heavy on his shoulders. He was a rational man, a hands-on kind of guy who fixed generators, rewired lights, patched roofs. But what he was living right now had no blueprint, no fix. He didn't reach for his phone again. He didn't need headlines or experts. He just stared and waited and listened. And the deeper he listened, the more he realized there was a sound, faint, deep, like the earth still shifting beneath the skin of the world. Not violent, just moving, like a message being passed below the roots and stones, waiting for someone to hear it. He looked at the deer again. They had heard it first, not with their ears, but with the same thing that makes birds flee before storms and dogs howl before earthquakes. That old frequency, that ancient instinct we traded away for comfort and speed. And somehow, by stopping his truck in time, by not pushing through, Tom had been invited into that awareness, if only for a moment. He was one of them now, not as an animal, but as a witness. Suddenly, something else shifted. A low creak, distant but clear, wood against rock. A tree, perhaps? Falling? He turned his head toward the slope to his right, scanning the tree line. Then the ground beneath him began to vibrate again. This time it wasn't subtle. It was a full tremble, a deep belly growl of the earth that made the gravel dance near his boots. His breath caught. The deer stiffened even more. Then came the sound, louder now, closer. Something was moving beneath the slope. Not a landslide this time. Not the roaring chaos from earlier. Something else. He took a step back toward the open truck door but didn't climb in. He had a choice. Trust the mountain again, or run. And still, the deer stood frozen, eyes fixed on whatever came next. The vibration grew stronger, turning into a physical force that made the soles of Tom's boots buzz against the ground. He steadied himself against the side of the truck, eyes scanning the ridgeline. And then, it came. The first sound wasn't what he expected. It wasn't an explosion or a boom. It was a deep, sickening crack, like the snapping of bones the size of buildings. It echoed off the trees, bouncing across the valley like thunder caught in a bottle. The trees above him shuddered. Birds, silent for so long, suddenly burst into the sky in a black swirling wave of panic. Tom's heart skipped a beat. He turned sharply, eyes locking on the bend in the road just ahead of where the deer stood. And then the mountain moved. At first it looked like the earth was breathing again. A pulse, a shift. But then the slope tore open. A wall of mud, rock, and broken trees exploding from the hillside like a dam had ruptured inside the mountain itself. With a roar so loud it drowned every other sound, the forest came alive in the most violent way imaginable. Tom stumbled backward as the landslide charged down, smashing through the canopy, uprooting pines like weeds, flinging stones the size of refrigerators across the road. He couldn't move, couldn't think. All he could do was watch. It was as if the world was being erased in front of him. The spot where his truck would have been, had he driven even 30 seconds further, vanished under thousands of pounds of earth. The road collapsed like paper. Asphalt curled and snapped. Guardrails twisted like wire. Trees were ripped from their roots, hurled downhill like toys. The noise was deafening, a sound that tore straight through the bones. The sky darkened under clouds of dust and debris. Tom's ears rang as if his body was rejecting the reality of what it was witnessing. He dropped to his knees. There was no thought behind it. It wasn't fear. It wasn't prayer. It was surrender. Overwhelm. His breath came in short, frozen gasps, misting in the cold air that had suddenly turned metallic with the scent of soil and sap and destruction. He raised his head just long enough to see the final trees at the edge of the ravine snap and fall, the last moment of violence before silence returned. And when the dust finally began to settle, when the roar gave way to the ghostly quiet of aftermath, the deer were still there. Not a single one had moved. Tom's eyes blurred with tears he hadn't realized were coming. His mind couldn't keep up with what he'd just seen. That much force, that much chaos, and yet the deer stood frozen in place like statues left behind by the gods. How? Why? The air was still vibrating faintly, like the echo of what had happened hadn't fully released its grip. Tom rose slowly, legs shaking beneath him, and took a step forward. Gravel crunched beneath his boots. Dust floated through beams of sunlight now breaking through the canopy. The world looked like a war zone. He scanned the hillside. The destruction was complete. There was no road anymore, no way forward, just a mangled, wounded earth, and 12 white-tailed deer still blocking his path, as if they'd known all along. His voice cracked in the cold air. You knew. It wasn't a question. The buck, still standing at the center of the herd, flicked an ear. Then slowly, gracefully, he turned his head. For the first time, his eyes met Tom's, and in that one, impossible moment, Tom felt everything. Gratitude, humility, wonder, grief, relief. It wasn't like looking at an animal. It was like looking at a force of nature with a face. Then the buck turned back, took one step into the forest. The others followed, like soldiers dismissed after completing a sacred duty. One by one, without panic, without noise, they slipped between the trees and vanished. Just like that, they were gone. Tom stood alone in the silence. The dust began to settle across the broken road like snowfall. Tiny flecks of ash and dirt drifted down, resting gently on his shoulders, his arms, the roof of his truck. A silence even deeper than before took hold, not empty, but reverent. The kind of silence that arrives only after something holy has passed through. He turned to face the mountain, or what was left of it. What he saw wasn't just destruction. It was clarity. If he had driven forward, if he hadn't stopped, if those deer hadn't been there, he would not be alive. It was a truth so absolute it rooted him in place. A man alone, rescued by a decision he hadn't made, led by animals that offered no explanation and asked for no thanks. Just gone. Back into the forest. He breathed in slowly. The air tasted different now. Heaviness lifted from his chest, but not entirely. The memory would stay, branded into his body, written into his bones. And in that quiet, that stillness, a question stirred. Were the deer sent, or did they simply know? And if they knew, how? How many stories like this had never been told? How many times had animals tried to intervene and been ignored? Tom looked down the road once more, at the broken fallen trees, the shattered rocks, the place where he should have died. His throat tightened. He wasn't the kind of man who believed in miracles, but he did now. Do you believe animals can sense things before they happen? Can they feel danger the way we feel weather? Tell us in the comments. Your experience, or even your doubt, might help someone see the world a little differently. Because sometimes, the quietest warnings come from voices we don't expect, and sometimes they save us, whether we understand them or not. And as Tom stood there, eyes still fixed on the forest's edge where the deer had disappeared, the wind picked up again, this time softer, warmer, but deep beneath the soil. Something else stirred. The mountain wasn't finished yet. Tom didn't know how long he stood there before the sound of a distant engine pulled him back to the present. It came from the opposite direction, the side he had already traveled. A bright orange rescue vehicle rounded the bend behind him, tires crunching over the gravel, moving slowly, cautiously. Two men stepped out, both dressed in the forest green uniforms of the National Park Service. One was older, gray-haired and stern-faced, the other younger, with a handheld radio clipped to his shoulder. They looked confused when they saw Tom standing in the road alone, dirt-streaked and pale, staring at a patch of forest that now looked like it had swallowed the earth whole. "You all right, sir?" the older one called out, approaching slowly. "We got a report of ground movement out this way, saw some sensors go dead." Tom turned his head, but couldn't speak at first. His voice cracked as the words pushed past a throat still tight with disbelief. "There was a slide," he said. "A big one. Right there. The whole road. It's gone." The rangers stepped closer, peering around him toward the devastation. When they saw it, their faces changed instantly. Eyebrows lifted, jaws clenched. "Jesus," the younger ranger whispered. The older man pulled a pair of binoculars from his chest strap and scanned the wreckage. "That's the worst one we've had in years. If anyone had been in that, they wouldn't have made it out." Tom nodded slowly. "I would have been. I was going to be." They looked back at him, puzzled. "But something stopped you?" the younger ranger asked. Tom paused. Then he said it, knowing exactly how crazy it would sound. "There were deer. A whole herd, blocking the road." There was a silence. They didn't run. They didn't spook. They just stood there, right where I would have been if I kept driving. The older ranger squinted. "You're saying the deer saved your life?" "I'm saying I didn't stop on my own. And if I hadn't stopped, I'd be buried under that hill." Neither ranger spoke right away. The younger one eventually gave a quiet whistle, shaking his head. "That's wild." The older man said nothing, eyes still fixed on the destruction. Then he said, almost under his breath, "Animals know more than we think." They radioed in the report. Soon more vehicles arrived. Emergency crews, park scientists, local volunteers. Drones were launched to survey the area. Photos were taken. Roads were closed. Helicopters buzzed overhead. It all happened quickly, but Tom watched it from the edge. Not a survivor in the dramatic sense, but something else. A witness to something no one could explain. Word spread fast. By that evening, local news stations were broadcasting the images. The video from a ranger's body cam showed the aftermath. A road missing, a forest torn in two, and a man who was supposed to be part of the wreckage still standing, untouched. The newscasters tried to keep the tone factual, but the undercurrent of wonder was there. Some reports mentioned the deer, others didn't. Online, however, the story took on a life of its own. People started sharing theories. Some said it was all just coincidence, that the deer had simply been moving through the forest like they always do, and Tom happened to stop at the right time. Others weren't so sure. Comments flooded social media. Nature knew. That man was saved by spirits. The Cherokee believe animals are messengers, Usna, this proves it. Why do we ignore what the earth tries to tell us? Some posts went viral. A photo someone took of Tom standing near the wreckage, staring into the forest, began circulating with captions like "Guardian Deer" and "Saved by the Wild." Local radio picked up the story, then regional podcasts. One late-night show did a dramatic retelling, complete with eerie music and forest soundscapes. Emails poured into the Park Service asking for updates. Some people even drove into the Smokies hoping to catch sight of the deer that had stopped death. Tom was interviewed briefly for a local station. He kept it simple. "I don't know why they were there," he said, "but I'm here because they were." And that was enough. But not for everyone. There were skeptics, of course. People who mocked the story online, who rolled their eyes and demanded proof. "Deer don't predict landslides," one post read. "They're not prophets." Maybe not. But they were right, weren't they? Because science could measure the mud and the slide angle and the pressure buildup beneath the soil. But it couldn't explain why those deer stood in that exact spot at that exact time. And the ones who believed, really believed, didn't need proof. They had faith in the wild, in intuition, in something older than words. A few elders from the Cherokee Reservation not far from Bryson City heard the story too. One of them, an old woman named Mary Two Rivers, gave a statement to a local newsletter. "We've always known the animals listen better than we do. Those deer weren't lost. They were sent. Whether it was instinct, coincidence, or something divine, the mountains weren't saying. They never do. But Tom wasn't looking for answers anymore. Not after what he'd seen, and what he still felt beneath the soles of his feet. Because deep in the roots of those mountains, something had spoken, and someone had listened. Even as the story spread, and people debated what had really happened on that lonely mountain road, something deeper began to stir in the quieter corners of the region, among those who didn't need satellite images or news anchors to validate what they already believed. The old stories were waking up again. In the Cherokee Nation, whose ancestral land once stretched far across these mountains, tales of deer were never just about animals. To them, deer were more than creatures of the forest. They were symbols of awareness, grace, and sometimes messengers sent between worlds. Tom had grown up hearing these stories from his grandfather, a man whose words carried weight even when they were spoken in whispers. But as life grew louder, faster, more distracted, those stories had become background noise, folklore reserved for fireside memories. Until now. Now those memories were rising from the roots like the trees themselves. Just 2 days after the landslide, a Cherokee elder named Mary Two Rivers, whose name had already surfaced in local papers, agreed to speak with a young journalist from a community radio station. Her voice, aged but steady, drifted across the static-filled airwaves of western North Carolina. "I'm not surprised by what happened," she said. "The animals, they speak, not with sound, but with signs. We've just forgotten how to read them." The journalist asked if she believed the deer had truly saved the man. "I don't believe it," she answered. "I know it." She went on to explain an ancient belief passed down from the Snowbird clan, one of the oldest lineages still rooted in the southern Appalachian region. According to the stories, deer walk between this world and the next. They appear when the veil is thin, when danger approaches, or when a soul is being tested. They don't speak in language, they speak in presence, in stillness, in resistance to the natural order. "They block paths for a reason," Mary said. "And they don't linger unless there's something that needs to be seen." Another elder, Eli Longtree, shared a tale even older than the road itself, one told to him by his great-grandfather in the Qualla boundary. "There was once a man," he said, "who hunted too far too long and forgot to show respect. The mountain warned him through cold wind, broken trees, but he didn't listen. One morning, as he stepped through a valley, a buck appeared and would not move. The man grew angry, tried to push past, but the buck stood still. Finally he waited, and not a moment later rocks fell from above, the exact place he would have stood." Eli smiled at the memory, eyes crinkled with time. That story was never meant to be a metaphor. It was a memory. To the Cherokee, these are not fairy tales. They are warnings encoded in generations, told again and again, not for entertainment, but for survival, for connection, for remembering what matters when the modern world tries to make you forget. Tom's story wasn't the first, and it wouldn't be the last. In fact, some say the deer have always watched from the edges of what we call reality, appearing only when the balance is threatened, when a soul is not yet ready to leave the earth. Some tribes believe the deer are guides, sent to lead the lost back to the right path, not just physically, but spiritually. Others believe they are protectors, chosen by the Creator to intervene when humans can no longer see what lies ahead. And there are those who go further still. Some say the deer are not animals at all, but spirits in disguise. Souls of those who once walked the mountains returned not to speak, but to stand in the way of fate. These stories are old, but now they're being told again. Shared between neighbors, whispered in coffee shops, discussed in schoolrooms and tribal gatherings. Played on the radio at dusk, passed through podcasts and social media, wrapped in awe and disbelief. Tom's story reawakened something, and in doing so, it reminded people of what they'd buried under asphalt, cement, and distraction. The forest is still watching. The animals are still speaking. We just stopped listening. But not everyone had forgotten. A park ranger who preferred not to give his name told a quiet story to one of the rescue workers days later. "You know what's strange," he said. "Last spring there was a woman who got lost in the park. 3 days, no food, no cell signal. When they found her, She said a deer had followed her the whole time, kept her near water, near shelter. She thought she was hallucinating, but when they retraced her steps, everything matched. He paused. It's not the first time I've heard something like that. Whether science believes it or not, there are those who say animals understand more than we'll ever measure. They feel shifts beneath the ground, changes in pressure, vibrations too subtle for our machines. But maybe, just maybe, it's more than instinct. Maybe it's empathy, or duty, or memory, passed through blood and bone and breath. Maybe the creatures of the wild carry a purpose we're too distracted to notice. And maybe, every once in a while, they decide to intervene. If this story touched something inside you, if it reminded you that we're part of something older, something still alive in the woods and the wind, leave a like right now. That's how we honor these stories. That's how we show the world they still matter. Because the most important voices in life don't always speak with words. And just beyond the trees, where the dust of the landslide had settled and the deer had vanished, the mountain still stood. Scarred, yes, but still breathing, waiting. As the story rippled across the region, it stirred something not only ancient but unspoken, and those who had remained silent now began to come forward. They hadn't been waiting for proof. They'd simply been waiting to see if anyone else would say it first. The first was a man named Derek Malone, a local delivery driver from nearby Sevierville. He called into a small-town radio station late one night, his voice calm but unshakably certain. "I was driving through the Smokies the same morning," he said, "not far from where that slide happened, and I saw them too. A whole group of deer, not running, just standing, still as statues. I slowed down because I thought maybe something was wrong with them. But the way they were looking, it was like they were watching something only they could see." He paused. "I didn't think much of it. But when I heard about that man who almost died, and the deer that blocked his truck, I knew it wasn't just a coincidence." Then came another report. Park Ranger Vanessa Holt, who had been stationed at a nearby fire tower that week, overheard her colleagues discussing the event. Quietly, she added her own story. "I saw them too," she said. "At dawn, near Ridge Hollow. Same kind of thing. They were in the middle of the trail, not moving, just looking straight ahead. And the weirdest part was, they didn't care that I was there. Normally deer scatter when they hear footsteps, but these ones didn't even blink." She hesitated. "I had a weird feeling, but I didn't know what it meant. I just kept walking. But now, I wish I'd paid more attention." From nearby Waynesville, a woman named Carla Brenner posted something online that went viral within hours. "I know this sounds crazy," she wrote, "but I had a dream the night before it happened. A dream about deer. They were standing in a line across a road in the woods. I was trying to get through, but they wouldn't let me pass. And when I woke up, I couldn't shake it. At first, people thought it was just someone chasing the attention of a trending story. But those who knew Carla vouched for her. She was private, quiet, not the type to post publicly about anything, let alone a dream. But what struck people most was her description of the road in her dream, the bend, the trees, even the slight tilt of the mountain. It matched the real scene with uncanny detail. The tension in the air grew. Not fear exactly, but something heavier. A weight of possibility. How many others had seen the deer that morning and said nothing? How many had ignored their own instincts because it didn't make sense? It wasn't just Tom anymore. The witnesses were adding up. But no one could quite say what the deer were doing or how they had known or why they had chosen that particular day, that particular man, that particular road. And maybe that was the point. Maybe we're not supposed to understand. Maybe we're just supposed to notice. Because sometimes the most important warnings come quietly, not in thunder, not in fire, but in the unmoving gaze of something ancient, watching from the trees, waiting for us to stop long enough to listen. And the Smoky Mountains? They were listening too. As more stories surfaced and people began to connect dots that had long been scattered, a larger question emerged. Not just about deer, or even about that mountain road, but about something more universal. Can animals truly sense disaster before it strikes? It sounds like folklore at first. like something passed down in bedtime stories or tribal myths. But the more you look, the harder it becomes to dismiss. There are documented cases from all over the world. In Sri Lanka, villagers reported elephants and flamingos moving inland minutes before the devastating 2004 tsunami hit. In China, thousands of toads were seen migrating away from the city of Mianyang days before the 2008 earthquake. In Japan, pet owners noted unusual barking, pacing, and hiding behaviors from dogs and cats just hours before major tremors. Some animals fled their enclosures altogether, as if trying to escape something that hadn't happened yet. And closer to home, residents in California and Alaska have told stories of wildlife vanishing into the forests just before landslides or quakes ripped through their towns. The patterns are consistent. Strange silence in the forest. Birds leaving their nests. Dogs whining at closed doors. Livestock refusing to feed. Deer, wolves, and bears changing their routes without visible reason. Moments of collective stillness that seem to ripple through the natural world before the earth breaks open. Science has long struggled to explain this. Some researchers believe animals are sensitive to subtle seismic vibrations, tremors too faint for humans to detect. Others suggest that they might sense changes in air pressure, ground frequency, or even magnetic fields disrupted by tectonic movement. Still others point to chemical cues, that perhaps animals can smell gases released by soil compression or sense electric charges building underground. But for all the theories, there is no definitive answer, because sometimes the evidence isn't found in a lab. It's found in the eyes of a creature that refuses to move, when everything else is urging you to keep going. That moment, the one Tom experienced on the edge of the collapse, is hard to quantify, but impossible to forget. It's the space where instinct whispers louder than logic, where the natural world reaches out and tugs at the edge of your awareness, asking you to stop, to wait, to trust. Maybe animals don't just react to danger. Maybe they recognize it. And maybe they choose in rare moments to act on behalf of others. It's not something science can fully map, and maybe it never will, because what lives in the space between instinct and intervention isn't just biology. It's something sacred. So when the deer stood on that road, unmoving, unflinching, unafraid, they weren't just reacting to an invisible threat. They were warning, guarding, teaching, and they weren't alone. Because nature knows before we do. It always has. The real question is, are we still willing to listen? Where are you watching this story from right now? And have you ever experienced something that felt impossible to explain? Tell us in the comments. Because sometimes the most powerful stories aren't the ones we tell, but the ones we remember when the forest finally goes silent. Now pause, and really ask yourself something. What would you have done if you were the one behind that wheel? Picture it. You're driving alone through the Smoky Mountains. Morning mist curling over the ridges. Silence so thick it feels like time itself is holding its breath. You round a bend, and there they are. A herd of deer, just standing there. Still. Blocking the road. No danger in sight. No storm. No visible threat. Just a dozen animals refusing to move. Would you have stopped? Or would you have done what most people do when their day gets interrupted? Honk. Get irritated. Maybe even try to push through. After all, it's just deer. You've got somewhere to be. You're on a schedule. You trust the road, the weather, your judgment. You're not one to be late, especially not because of animals. But what if that delay was the only thing keeping you alive? What if that inconvenience was the one moment the universe screamed, "Wait!" and you didn't listen? That's the part no one likes to think about. We live in a world built around speed, around control, around our schedules, our logic, our priorities. But nature doesn't operate on our time. It never has. And when something steps in to stop us, whether it's an animal, a delay, a missed turn, a gut feeling we can't explain, we usually fight it. But what if those moments weren't accidents? What if they were interventions? It's uncomfortable, isn't it? The thought that something invisible might know better than we do, that something we can't quantify, an instinct, a presence, a warning, might be trying to protect us, even when we're too distracted to notice. Tom didn't stop because he knew what was coming. He stopped because something made him stop. And that decision, or that surrender, changed everything. Imagine the alternate version of that story. One where he pushed forward. One where he ignored the deer. One where he rounded that curve with confidence and drove straight into thousands of pounds of falling earth. It would have been over in seconds. But here's the truth most of us ignore. Sometimes the interruptions in our lives are the only things saving us. We call them delays, detours, annoyances. But what if they're actually timing mechanisms we don't understand? Nature's way of adjusting the course? That moment, being forced to stop, gave Tom a choice. Not just between life and death, but between faith and control, between listening and pushing forward blindly. And maybe we've all had a moment like that. A second where something inside said, "Not yet, not this way. Wait, did you listen? Would you now?" It's easy to look at someone else's story and say, "I would have done the same." But when it's you, with the engine running, the road ahead clear, and nothing but your instinct telling you to stop, and would you? Or would you call it irrational? Overreaction? Weakness? We all like to believe we'd listen, but most people never do, because real listening means surrendering, slowing down, trusting something we can't see. And yet, again and again, those who survive the impossible always say the same thing. I felt something, and I listened. So maybe the next time the world asks you to pause, you won't see it as an obstacle. You'll see it as a lifeline. Because sometimes what looks like a delay is a decision being made on your behalf. The mountain was quiet again. Not the kind of quiet that comes from peace, but the kind that settles after something ancient has moved. The trees stood still. The air held its breath. The torn earth remained where it had fallen, resting like a wound that refused to close. The stretch of road where Tom's truck had stopped was no longer a road. It was a scar, split open by mud, stone, and time. A silent reminder of what could have been, and what didn't happen. But just because nothing happened to Tom doesn't mean nothing happened. Because something had. Something enormous. Something invisible. And in the middle of all that silence, one thing became clear. The message had never been shouted. It had only been whispered. Whispered through the stillness of the deer. Whispered through the rumble beneath the ground. Whispered through the choice to wait, to pause, to trust what couldn't be seen. This story isn't just about one man in the mountains. It's about a language we've stopped listening to. A dialogue between nature and instinct, between time and timing, between presence and protection. And once you start to hear that language, you begin to realize this wasn't the only time. It happens more often than we admit. It happened in the Pacific Northwest when a hiker slipped on a trail and broke his leg, stranded with no signal and no food. He thought he'd die there, until a wolf appeared. Not to attack, but to stay. For 2 nights, the wolf lay nearby, never too close, never too far. It left only after a search party arrived. One of the rescuers said, it was like the animal knew someone was watching over him. It happened in Alaska, where a fisherman's boat capsized during a freak storm. He swam to shore, freezing, alone. A massive brown bear appeared on the bank. He was sure he would die, but the bear didn't attack. It sat nearby as night fell, unmoving, like a sentry. By dawn, a rescue chopper spotted the man, because the bear was visible from the sky, and they came in low to investigate. It happened in Brazil, when a young girl was found deep in the forest 3 days after disappearing. She was unharmed, except for scratches on her legs. When asked how she survived, she told her rescuers that a big dog with golden eyes had stayed with her the whole time. Her parents didn't have a dog. It happened, and it keeps happening. Because the line between the wild and the human is not as thick as we think, and some animals, some moments, seem to exist on that line. Not every encounter is mystical. Not every deer is a messenger. But sometimes, when everything lines up, when silence stretches long enough and when you're willing to listen, something slips through. Something that reminds you the world is not as quiet as it seems. Tom never saw the deer again. He returned to the site a week later after the road had been cordoned off, when the emergency crews had gone home and the news vans had moved on to something louder. The forest was almost too calm, as if the chaos had never happened. But the wound in the earth was still there, and so was the feeling. He walked a few yards from the truck, boots crunching gently through gravel and pine needles, and just stood there, listening. And that's when it happened. A soft rustle, a subtle movement in the trees. His eyes locked onto the shadows, and there, at the edge of the clearing, stood a single deer. It wasn't the buck. It wasn't the doe. It wasn't any of the ones he remembered with certainty. But it had the same eyes, the same silence, the same presence. It looked at him, not with fear, not with curiosity, with something else. Recognition. And then it turned, slowly, and stepped back into the forest. Gone. Just like that. But that was all Tom needed. Because some connections don't need proof. Some stories don't need endings. And some lessons are only meant to be learned once, and then carried for the rest of your life. He got back in his truck, turned the key, and let the engine hum quietly beneath him. Not because he was ready to leave, but because the forest had given him permission to go. The road may have been broken, but he wasn't. And that's when you realize something most people never do. The wild doesn't always want something from you. Sometimes it's trying to give you something instead. Time, clarity, a second chance, or a moment that redefines how you see the world. But to receive it, you have to be quiet. You have to be still. And above all, you have to believe, even just a little, that you're not alone out there, because you're not always. If this story held you, if something in it echoed something deep inside you, then maybe it had something to show you. And if that's true, if you stayed with us all the way to the end, then maybe you were meant to hear this today. So take a second, subscribe to the channel, hit the bell so you don't miss the next story that's already on its way to your screen. And most importantly, remember this. Sometimes the thing that saves your life doesn't speak your language, but it doesn't have to. It just has to stand in your way until you finally stop long enough to listen.